how can we take action to care for our own souls as we are serving others? In this episode, I'm joined by Dan Reiland. Dan serves as the Executive Director for Leadership Expansion at 12 Stones Church in Lawrenceville, Georgia, where he also has served for 20 years as the Executive Pastor. Previously, Dan spent 2 decades serving with John Maxwell, first as the Executive Pastor at Skyline Wesleyan Church in San Diego, and then as Vice President for Leadership and Church Development at Maxwell Leadership. Together, Dan and I explore 4 prominent areas of soul care for pastors and ministry leaders. And then Dan shares experiences from his own life that help illustrate how we can incorporate soul care into our lives as well. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, friends, and welcome to another insightful episode of FrontStage, BackStage. I am your host, Jason Daye, and every single week I have the privilege of sitting down with a trusted ministry leader, and we dive into a conversation. And our hope is that this conversation will help you and pastors and ministry leaders like you embrace really a healthy, sustainable rhythm in both your life and ministry. We are proud to be a part of the Pastor Serve Network. And in addition to this show, we also create a toolkit for every single episode that allows you and the ministry leaders in your local church to dig more deeply into the topic that we discuss. And that toolkit can be found at pastorserve.org/network. In there, you will find a lot of resources, including a ministry leader's growth guide with questions for reflection, again, that you can work through maybe in your weekly staff meetings or when you're working with your ministry volunteers, your ministry leaders. And so we encourage you to take advantage of that resource. Now, our team at Pastor Serve loves blessing pastors, and we would love to offer a complimentary coaching session to any pastors or ministry leaders. You can get more details on that at pastorserve.org/free session. Give you an opportunity to have a conversation with one of our trusted coaches. So be sure to check that out as well. Now, if you are joining us on YouTube, take time to give us a thumbs up, and in the comments below, just take a moment to drop your name and the name of your church. We'd love to get to know you better, and our team will be praying for you and for your ministry. And whether you are joining us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, please be sure to subscribe, to follow, so you do not miss out on any of these great conversations. And today we do have an excellent conversation. At this time, I'd like to welcome Dan Reiland to FrontStage, BackStage. Dan, welcome.
Hey, welcome. Thank you, Jason. Good to be with you.
Yeah, such a joy to have you with us today, Dan. Thank you for making time to hang out with us. Now, Dan, we both know, and all those watching along and listening along probably know this as well, that serving in ministry, it's not an easy vocation, right? We face many challenges because the enemy does not want us to be effective in service to Christ, does not want us to be effective with the mission of God. So that is kind of a constant adversary, a constant challenge. But in our lives, in our ministries, there are other pockets of challenges, right? We have our congregation, those people that God has entrusted to us and entrusted into our care. And there could be relational challenges there. Our ministry leaders, whether we have paid staff, whether we have volunteers, there are challenges there with our teams. We live in a rapidly shifting culture, right? And that brings all sorts of challenges as well. Now, we can look out and identify a lot of these challenges, but we also need to look within to identify our personal challenges. And so, Dan, as we enter into today's conversation, I'd love for you to help us kind of process through what does it take for us to not only acknowledge all the stuff out there, but then to really turn inward and begin looking at ourselves.
Well, that's a huge question. You have set us up well. We could talk for hours.
Yes.
When I think about all that you just said as a wonderful introduction, the thing that comes to mind that I think we all face is pace and pressure. And because I think, or sometimes I'll call it speed and pressure, as the church grows, as as any organization grows, but particularly as the church grows, the pace increases and the pressure increases. And if we don't, and that's where leaders sometimes tap out. That's where sometimes leaders can get unhealthy. And sometimes the pace and pressure, that sounds fast, but sometimes it takes a while to happen. And all of a sudden we find ourselves in an increased pace, running, moving, going, and the pressure rises and rises and rises. And we really haven't figured out soul care. We haven't figured out margins. We haven't figured out rhythms. We haven't figured out relationship. We haven't figured out all the components that really ask us to slow down so we actually can go faster and more effective. So I don't know where you want to start and all that, but I would toss my thoughts into the ring of saying pace and pressure is something that we really have to pay attention to. And how do we counteract that in healthy ways?
Yeah, I love that pace and pressure. That's really well said, Dan. And it's interesting because we know we can get caught up in the work of the ministry, right?
Right.
And in good ways, in that we're called to this, right? And so we have a heart for this, and so we're seeking to honor God in this. But sometimes we can get so caught up in the work of the ministry that we don't acknowledge in some ways how um, the way we're going about it might actually be damaging our own souls.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
Dan, can you help us think through what are some ways that we might be able to identify some of those soul stresses in our own lives? In other words, when we're running, going, we may not see it, but then it catches up with us. So how can we begin to recognize, wait a second, I need to slow down here. I need to spend some time on my own soul.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things from things as practical as we sleep for the night, but we wake up tired, where or we do things with people we love, but the joy is diminished. We lack energy and vitality by the afternoon. There's a lot of warning signs. I think uh, when we lose sometimes the ability to manage our own emotions, there's just a lot of things like that, and kind of what's behind some of those things, not the physical thing necessarily, but another whole factor that's pretty huge to dig into is our fears and insecurities, because that's what's underneath all of it, our fears and insecurities. We all have them. The thing that, but the good news is, in Christ, some of us have a lot of insecurities, some of us have a few insecurities, but we're all working on lowering them in Christ. But the really good thing to know about let's just start with insecurities, is there's a huge difference, big difference between being an insecure person, an insecure leader, an insecure person, and having an insecure moment. I think we all have insecure moments because we're leading people where we've never been before. We're leading them where we've never been together before. So of course we're going to have insecure moments. Of course we're going to have it's a new territory. We've not done that before. We've not been there before because we're leading. We're out front leading. But again, that such a huge difference between that insecure moment. We'll figure it out. We'll get there. We don't know what to do in the moment, but we'll figure it out. And just being an insecure person because of maybe the lack of margin or the all kinds of other things that are underlying. Another thing that's encouraging to know is that just because you don't know what to do in that moment doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing.
Mm.
And that's another thing we can absorb that helps us rise above insecurities, helps us to rise above the fears, and then move into, because sometimes, again, I'm trying to connect all these thoughts because you've got my mind racing with thoughts here. When we talk about pace and pressure and the go and all that stuff, that actually increases our insecurities, that increases our fears because it pulls us away from what I mentioned earlier, like rhythms and margins and different things where that produces health, where the going and the going nonstop actually reduces our health.
Yeah, that's helpful, Dan. So let's talk a little bit about some of those rhythms and creating that margin. How do we begin to set those healthy rhythms in our lives, and what might those look like practically?
Well, if we looked at it kind of on a bigger picture, I think rhythms are based off of a soul centering. For me, my centering for decades, I know I'm the ancient one, my rhythms have always been based on prayer and exercise. That may not be yours, Jason. It could be something, everybody may be different. But for me, there's a daily rhythm. And I think every one of us has to find that sort of soul deep, quiet walk with God space that brings us back to center on a daily basis. But then there's weekly rhythms, annual rhythms, but what brings us back to center? And my favorite analogy or metaphor or whatever is the metronome. I don't know if you into music at all, but
All
the
right.
metronome. And so there's a rhythm to it. There's a balance. And it's all about how do we come back to center. For example, if you think about vacation, right? And it's rhythm, not balance. If you think about vacation, what's balanced about a vacation? I mean, you swing way out here. You lay on the beach for 2 weeks and eat whatever you want and do nothing. Right?
Right.
And so how is that balanced? Well, it's actually part of a rhythm where you swung way out for extra rest, long rest, time with family, but you keep coming back. Sometimes maybe over here you're writing a book, or here you're doing a capital campaign with the church. But where men and women in ministry get in trouble is when they swing out and they don't come back. When they swing out and they don't know what the center is, they don't know what that balance is, whether it's the daily rhythm or the healthy pressure relief valves versus the unhealthy pressure relief valves. And so when we know what that is, we know how to check ourselves and evaluate ourselves. For me, as I mentioned, daily prayer and exercise. I'm an old jogger, kind of for decades and decades, every day. And if I miss a day because I'm traveling, or if I miss a day because I'm sick, I feel it. Or if I miss a day from prayer, I feel it. And I mentally know it's not a mystery, it's not magic. I know, I got to get back to my rhythm. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I love that, and I love the distinction there, Dan, between balance and rhythm. Because oftentimes we hear this idea of balance, and when you're in the throes of ministry, you're in a challenging time. You're like, there's how in the world can I ever get balance? And it feels defeating almost.
Right.
But when you talk about it as rhythm, that there are these periods that may be more challenging. I think of I'm a father of six, and there are
Oh my.
definitely times as we were raising our kids where, man, we were in the throes of it all. There was not a whole lot of balance because we're juggling these six kids, and then there are times where there is a time to refresh and relax. So if we're looking for balance all the time, we're going to feel defeated. But if we're looking for that rhythm, as you mentioned, that time of where we can rest, and sometimes we're going to be, working more deeply, harder, but always trying to come back to that center, I think is vital. So thank you for that. What are
Right.
some of the practices, Dan? I'm curious. What are some of the practices? You talked about prayer and physical exercise for yourself, but are there particular practices or ways of going about our lives and our ministries that help us get back to that center?
Yeah. So, by the way, I got to say, I connect with you hugely. I'm a papa now. I have grandkids. So much fun.
Yeah.
And we have a 3-year-old granddaughter. But my daughter also just had, 12 weeks ago, identical twin boys. And so when you talk about the chaos of life, I mean, this is real life,
Right.
and it doesn't feel balanced. And you've got two little infant boys with the 3-year-old says, well, I want to play. And how how does anybody have anything normal, even rhythms and balance? But you actually can. And I watch them do it, even though, which is a powerful, powerful commentary on life rhythms. When in the midst of chaos, you still know there's peace. You
Yes.
still sense like we're okay. And watching them 724 on the feeding cycle with two. But going over to your question, I just had to say that for
Yeah,
a
that's
second
good.
because I think it's good for us all to be reminded that we're not walking around in long white robes, and life is crazy, and the car does break, and things don't always go well. But these things are the things that actually keep us healthy and normal in the midst of all the interruptions of ministry and the 6 children like you have and all that kind of a thing. But going back to your question, I think one of the things we can do on the practices is finding how do we find margin? How do you do that in your schedule? What does it look like? What's it for? Um, I think sometimes we look for margin on the backside, and that's a dangerous place to find it. Or we try to go get rest on a vacation, and you can't solve on a vacation. I don't remember who said this, but it was a brilliant line. You can't solve on vacation what you don't live out normally. And you can't solve in finding uh, margin when you're exhausted. You have to build like you just worked and worked and worked. Now I'm going to go get some margin. Or one of my buddies says all the time, I'm going to go get my life back. No, you're not.
Right, right.
You're just going to be exhausted for a while. Then you're going to go back to doing it the same way you've always been doing. So
Right.
let me just tell you some practical things that I've done over the years, because
Yeah.
I'm kind of a former workaholic and learned the hard way how to climb out of these things. And my calendar was always insanely packed, and it's still kind of crazy packed. But for example, all of my 2-hour meetings, I made hour-and-a-half meetings. All of my hour-and-a-half meetings are 75-minute meetings. All of my 60-minute meetings are 50-minute meetings. And I've got these literally daily margins where I can make a phone call. I can do an email. I can just walk outside and get sunshine on my face. I can be quiet for a second. I can walk down the hall and say hi to somebody. Um, that's a practical way you can do it. One thing that this is like a true confession. It took a long time to try this, and now I would never not do it. Almost every Thursday for weeks in advance, I'll have nothing in it or very little in it. And it used to drive me insane to think, how could I possibly allow a big blank thing in my calendar to look at me like that? And I gotta look at that. But when I started having that margin, I can tell you for years and years and years and years and years and years, by the time I get to that Thursday, it's full. But it was full with things that needed a place to go. Someone needed to talk. Someone, a cool a podcast like this. Just it needed a place to be found, and it would have never had a place if I allowed every minute to be filled. So that's a little bit on the practical side. Where else could we talk about
Yeah,
margin?
no. Yeah, I love that thought on margin. And I love the fact that margin is something you have to do in advance.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's the whole idea of margin, right? If you try to fit margin in when you have time,
Right.
it never
Yes.
happens, right?
Right.
So I love that those practical points on kind of thinking about margin and making that space. Are there other things that you would say, maybe kind of behind the scenes, family life, those
Mhm.
types of things, your relationships, your family, that really contribute to this idea of caring for your own soul?
Wow. Or maybe even caring for the souls of others. One of the things I think is important is to save some energy for the people that you love the most. Um, you know, when we come home, because we love our work, we're called, we're passionate, we love the people, we love the church, we love seeing the kingdom advance. But if you come home and you're exhausted, or if you come home and you're there but you're not present, or you're worried, or it's can you save some time for the people that save some energy, not just time. That's what I meant. Save energy for the people that you love the most, to be able to play, to be able to talk, to have conversations. And my wife laughs at me because I have my what we call my driveway conversations. Because I'm always on the phone on the way home, and the phone calls are never done. So I sit in my driveway for like ridiculous amounts of time. She goes, "What's Dad doing?" Well, when the kids are here, I'm an empty nester now. Well, he's finishing up his driveway phone calls, And but when I come in, I'm done. It's done. Let's go, and you can tend to the family. You can have dinner together, maybe watch a movie, or do whatever you're going to do. That's all age range,
Right.
depends on your family, right? Um, you might be hanging out, watch a movie to one season, but another season it's bath and diapers and bedtime. I mean, it's all
Yeah.
different wherever we are. But you're able to just be there, and I think that deep inside we know that's what pleases God. Talking about where you went in terms of care for our own souls. we don't live in with the angst that we do when we just know better. We just know better, and we do it wrong anyway. And that's probably one of the things that I talk with pastors about a lot. And that is that there is I've given, this isn't a clinical explanation, but I've given it the term that works for me, is a low grade angst. It's not clinical. You're functional. It works fine. But there's this kind of spot in your gut. And it's just this low grade angst that's always there. It's the absence of peace. And when you know you're doing exactly what Jesus wants you to do, that low grade angst dissipates and peace kind of fills you. And I tell you, because I've done it the wrong way and I've done it the right way, when you're playing with your kids or you're playing with your grandkids, the peace is there and the angst is gone. Do we have a minute to tell you a quick story?
Oh yeah, please.
Okay. So it was last week. It was last week. And I'm teaching and speaking and doing stuff and traveling quite a bit this spring. Might have overdone it a tad. But I've got all these talks and all these things I've got to get, all the way. And this day this one has to be written, and this one has to be written, and the next all the way till like almost July. But I'm aware of my kids and my grandkids the other week and how my daughter's many days got all three under three herself and the two twins. And I know their feeding cycle, the boys' feeding cycle. And I know one of them's at 4:00, and she's got to do the clean the nose and do the thing and change the diaper and feed the one, but the other one's crying because the other one, And I said, you know what? This is going to cost. Is this going to put me behind? I'm just going to go over there and help. I'm going to feed one of the boys, and she can feed one of the boys. And then when she's got them both and trying to get them for a nap, I'll take Anza for a walk, come back, and that was like 2 hours or more. And I promise you, the angst that I felt with sorry, I got a little off there for a second. The angst that I felt in knowing how much I had to write was completely gone when I was playing with the kids.
Right.
And when I went back, I didn't regret it for a second. It was the right thing to do. That's kind of you're giving yourself away, but it's kind of a soul care process because you're doing the thing that you know you should do. And isn't it funny? I'm going to give this back to you because I'm talking way too long. Isn't it funny that sometimes even when we know the thing we should do, we don't? But then when we do the right thing, we get reminded that was the right thing. And then we go back and do the wrong thing the next day anyway. I mean, why do we do that? I don't know. So
Right.
you help us now. You tell us what the problem is.
Yeah. Oh, I wish I had an answer to that one, Dan. But I love what you're saying there. The idea that it's almost giving ourselves permission, right, Dan?
Yeah.
Giving ourselves permission to step back, to enter into a time, a place, a period where it's just good for our soul, right? It's good for our heart. It's good for our soul. It's good for those around us, people that we care about. And that replenishes us. As you said, Dan, I mean, you didn't come back and be like, oh my goodness, why did I spend 2 hours? I have so much, I have so much to do. Instead,
Exactly.
you're replenished. And that's the thing that we tend to forget. We tend to think that that time's going to be lost. But fortunately, we serve a God who redeems things, and so God redeems those times because God knows we need those times of refreshment, right? I love that. I think that's a great example. So you mentioned something earlier about a little bit about emotions, and how emotions play into our emotional health plays into not only how effective we are in ministry, right? But also just our the health of our overall life. So can you talk to us a little bit about in leadership, in ministry leadership, some emotions that we need to kind of be on the lookout for, those types of things that might that might be popping up, and we may just think, oh, that's just part of life, but they may actually be flags helping us understand, wait a second, there's something we need to tend to here in our soul.
Absolutely. Because I think our responsibility, and it's not easy. I mean, we're all human, but I think our responsibility is to lead our emotions rather than letting our emotions lead us. Because when we get fatigued or under pressure, again, the pace and pressure thing, it's easy for the emotions to get ahead of us, get out of control, kind of run ahead, even get angry or whatever it might be. A discouragement, I think, is probably one of the number one emotions that leaders deal with on a daily basis. I also believe, Jason, that it's actually the enemy's number one tactic against us, because typically the leaders don't do these gross things that blow up their life, but it's that low grade anxiousness, that grind over a long period of time with discouragement that can really take a leader out. As a matter of fact, let me share something else, and we can come right back on to what can we do about it, kind of a thing. But it's sparked by that idea of discouragement. I think that in terms of expectations, we have expectations of God, we have expectations of others. The church has expectations of us, and you and I both know, Jason, that expectations always lead to either delight or discouragement. Always. That's just a fact. Expectations lead in marriage, with your kids, in ministry, they lead to delight or disappointment. And we don't have to talk about delight. We all know what that is. That's a good thing.
Right.
So on the disappointment side, on the emotions, here's what I've learned: that prolonged disappointment leads to discouragement, and prolonged or sustained discouragement leads to frustration, and prolonged frustration leads to anger.
Mm.
And if we can learn to get on the front side of that, on the disappointment piece, rather than letting it go all the way to frustration or even anger, we're so far ahead of the game in learning to lead our emotions rather than being led by them. So if we can come all the way back to just disappointment, and I don't mean disappointment like you went to a restaurant and had a lousy meal. Get over it. Go to a different restaurant, But the things that are real disappointments, again, not about, and that's a place too to check our maturity, because we can see our maturity. I can see my maturity really quickly by what disappoints me, what I didn't get, what didn't happen. But there are some legitimate, real disappointments in life. And at that point, when we can learn to take that disappointment to God, or to a friend or a coach or a counselor or a buddy, before it goes to discouragement, before it goes to frustration, before it goes to anger, wow, have we done something good?
Yeah, that's a really helpful kind of continuum, Dan, that you
Mhm.
share there, because it really kind of puts things in place, and it helps us kind of identify, man, if I'm really frustrated about something, that means I've let it go to the point where it's gotten to frustration,
Right.
right? Right. So that's incredibly helpful. Dan, talk to me a little bit about community
Mhm.
and how community relates to caring for our soul as a ministry leader, like the relationships that we have and in the value of those, because we know, Dan, we probably all know that isolation is one of the most dangerous things,
Absolutely.
that we tend to isolate whenever we find ourselves in that disappointment, discouragement, frustration, downslide, or when we're feeling that low level angst, or maybe it's increasing the level of that angst in our lives. We tend to sometimes isolate, but isolation is very dangerous. So talk to us, Dan, about the idea of community.
Yeah, our senior pastor, Kevin Myers, he's often said something that the first time I ever heard it, 20 years ago, I thought, wow, that was a bold statement, kind of a thing. But he said, we're only as sick as our secrets. And that connects with your isolation. I think community is the resolve to a lot of things, because I think that conversation, deep, authentic, just conversation, solves 51% of all the issues we deal with. If we can just get it out, talk about it in a safe environment, in a trusted environment, where we realize, yep, I'm pretty much the same as all the others in the room. And everybody else goes, yep, and then together we help each other get strength, and so I talk about it with the leaders I coach in terms of their inner circle, and who are the peoples that they should have in their inner circle. Now, some leaders have a much larger one, some have a smaller one, but that doesn't matter. That's just personality. That's just wiring. That's just size of your personality, But there are some components, whether it's a coach or a prayer partner or uh, a spiritual advisor, or that who is in your inner circle, and who are those people that you have complete honesty and transparency with, and it's a high level of trust. And for me, I always say this, that they need to be smart and strong, because if they're not strong, you're just going to push them over, and if they've got to be able to just be able to speak wisdom. And so that inner circle is so important, that community. And I really think we have to give ourselves permission to choose that group. We're called in ministry to love everybody, and we should. And we should treat everybody with high respect, and we should. But there's some points where you need to choose who that inner group is, so that you can be refreshed and restored to pour your life into people that you barely even know, but you need to love them and care for them. And it's interesting. Sometimes I think leaders choose. This is crazy to say, but they choose that group by obligation or by guilt or by pressure. And I want to say, give yourself freedom to choose people that you really enjoy being with, who have wisdom and they're strong, and make sure those people are in your life with transparency, and you guys talk. Yeah, you just talk.
Yeah, that's good. That's really helpful. And that idea of having a safe space for pastors and ministry leaders, that can be a real challenge, because oftentimes we feel that we have to look like we're the ones who've got it together. We're the ones who have the answers, right? We feel that pressure. And so to let down our guard and to be, just honest with areas in which we might be struggling, or, challenges that we're facing, that's not always easy to do. Dan, how would you encourage a pastor to kind of embrace that idea of a safe space? Because again, it's not something that comes natural, especially if you've been in ministry a long time and have felt the pressure to kind of, make it look like everything's working for you, right?
So, Jason, when you ask that question, are you saying that in context of a pastor or a leader perhaps who isn't in a safe place like that, or doesn't have that super transparency?
Yeah, exactly. That has not yet found that
Doesn't
safe
not yet?
space, right?
Great question. Start with one person. It starts by taking a risk. You cannot avoid the risk. So find that one person. You go, you know what? I'm going to take a risk, and and I would say, step one, choose the person carefully. Who's strong? Who's wise? Who do you? Who would you be willing to take that risk with? And then literally carve out a couple of hours and take a risk and tell your stories. Like, tell your whole story, not like the 10-minute. I mean, tell your story. And what I promise is that you're not going to shock them, and they're not going to shock you. And you're going to, oh my gosh, and we're both pretty normal. And no, you're a little weirder than I am. Or no, actually, I'm a little weirder than you are. But there's this lifting that, when light replaces dark, when hope replaces fear, when um, there's just a bond and a community. If you'll take that one step, and it's so refreshing. You go, I think I need to add another one in this circle, and another one, and another one. That's how it starts, and that's how it grows.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Dan. As we're kind of winding down here, we've talked a lot about soul care for a ministry leader. We've talked about emotions. We've talked about community and relationships. We've talked about margin. Is there anything else, Dan, that as you have the eyes and ears of brothers and sisters who are faithfully serving, in terms of, because there's a great need for soul care for ministry leaders. Like, we need to pay attention to this, because we can just push so hard, and we've seen, unfortunately, tragic results of
Yeah.
ministry leaders who have not tended to their own
Yeah.
souls. So as we're winding down, I just want to, turn it over to you, Dan, as you're just speaking to brothers and sisters. Is there anything else in this regard of soul care that you'd like to share?
I would, and this kind of actually takes us in a little bit different direction, because I feel like the right answer is Jesus. The right answer, isn't always Jesus. The right answer is prayer, which we know it's true. And I have this, like a personal sanctuary, a little prayer room in the basement, and it's just a powerful thing. And I think it really does all go there. But I think I'll take advantage of your offer and go to a slightly different place that I think is an untalked about arena of soul care, and that's time to think. When I ask leaders, when do you think? I think all the time. No, you don't. We don't. We're on autopilot. And if you don't carve out time to think, time to be quiet, time to get ahead of stuff, what happens is you actually erode the margin you try so hard to get. You erode the peace you try so hard to get, and you elevate the anxiety, because one of the leader's most important functions, obligation, responsibility to those they lead is think time. And if you don't have it, you're eroding all the things we've been talking about in this conversation. When I get to work with younger leaders, actually not necessarily just younger leaders, and we talk about think time, and say, well, when am I going to put that in? And well, try 2 hours one night and 2 hours one morning, and that's it for the week. That's it. Or if you're not a big block person, then maybe it's 30 minutes in a day. Whatever it works for you. But I had one young guy who was so cool. He said, well, I'm going to try it. I'm going to put think time in my calendar. And he came back. I said, next session, I said, how'd you do? He goes, well, not so good. I said, why? He said, I didn't know what to think about. And we laughed. I said, you're serious? He said, I'm serious. I said, okay, let's start here. Do you think when you write a talk? He said, yeah. Well, that's one kind. But let me tell you the primary way that a leader engages thought, and that's problem solving. That's the primary arena in which we all live in thinking. And so I said, well, what's your number one problem you're working on right now? Blah, blah, blah. And so I said, this week, go take a couple of blocks of time and just put think time into solving that problem. Talk about, write stuff down. So I think, even though that doesn't sound like the right answer, I think putting space and time into just think, whether it's writing a talk or solving a problem, is actually part of soul care, so that you actually can benefit from all the things from prayer to margin to rhythm that we've been talking about, by actually advancing ministry strategically through think time.
Yeah, I love that, Dan. I think it's a great answer, because again, as we talked, we're involved in so many different things in ministry, and there's so many plates that are spinning, and then we want to be a good spouse or a good parent, and we want to be a good friend, and we want to do all these things
Yeah.
that if we do not take that time to just think through those things, those bigger rocks that
Mhm.
are in our lives, then we just find ourselves glossing over it, right? And we find ourselves, trying to climb over it or work around it, as opposed to tackling it head on. And I think that for myself, I know whenever we process through something like that, man, that's life giving, right,
Oh, yeah.
Dan? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
you
Oh,
feel
yeah.
so. You feel like, okay, we're getting somewhere. We're not just spinning the plates. We're making progress. So I think that's excellent, brother.
Yeah.
Dan, you've contributed so much to the church, the capital C church, in so many ways. You've provided a ton of insights and resources, and I'm very personally very grateful for how you just give of yourself to the church. For those who are watching, listening in, if they wanted to avail themselves of some of those resources, you do a ton of writing. Where can they find those resources? How can they connect with you and things that you have going on?
Thank you. I think the easiest is just go to danreiland.com, and my blog site is there. I don't know, we don't keep them all there, but I think there's almost 500 articles there. We keep dumping the older ones, and some of my books are there, and some of the things I can offer are there. But danreiland.com is the simple way to go.
Perfect. I love that. And man, Dan, thank you so much for making time. I'm glad that you keep some space in your Thursdays so that you
Yeah.
and I could hang out and have an awesome conversation. I know it's going to be meaningful for our audience. So God bless you, brother. Thank you so much for being with us. And I want to let our listeners know that I will have links to things that Dan mentioned at pastorserve.org/network in the toolkit for this episode, for our conversation that we've shared here together. So be sure to check that out. Dan, God bless you, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason.
Now, before you go, I want to remind you of an incredible free resource that our team puts together every single week to help you and your team dig more deeply and maximize the conversation that we just had. This is the weekly toolkit that we provide, and we understand that it's one thing to listen or watch an episode, but it's something entirely different to actually take what you've heard, what you've watched, what you've seen, and apply it to your life and to your ministry. You see, FrontStage, BackStage is more than just a podcast or YouTube show about ministry leadership. We are a complete resource to help train you and your entire ministry team as you seek to grow and develop in life and ministry. Every single week, we provide a weekly toolkit, which has all types of tools in it to help you do just that. Now, you can find this at pastorserve.org/network. That's pastorserve.org/network. And there you'll find all of our shows, all of our episodes, and all of our weekly toolkits. Now, inside the toolkit are several tools, including video links and audio links for you to share with your team. There are resource links about different resources and tools that were mentioned in the conversation, several other tools, but the greatest thing is the Ministry Leaders Growth Guide. Our team pulls key insights and concepts from every conversation with our amazing guests. And then we also create engaging questions for you and your team to consider and process, providing space for you to reflect on how that episode's topic relates to your unique context at your local church, in your ministry, and in your life. Now, you can use these questions in your regular staff meetings to guide your conversation as you invest in the growth of your ministry leaders. You can find the weekly toolkit at pastorserve.org/network. We encourage you to check out that free resource. Until next time, I'm Jason Daye, encouraging you to love well, live well, and lead well. God bless.